Thank you everybody for joining us this evening. My name is Nell Burkett. I'm the curator at the Crested Butte Mountain Heritage Museum. Thank you to Colorado State historian Duane Vandenbusche for leading this series all about history of the Crested Butte area. We hope that when everybody has a chance to visit Crested Butte that they'll swing by the museum located at 331 Elk Avenue. We have many exhibits and rotating exhibits as well that delve into history of Gunnison County and particularly the Northern Valley. We also have a fantastic store, and any shopping that you do in our store goes to supporting the museum as well. Finally, we do have walking tours going on right now every Saturday at 2 p.m. In the summer, they're at 3 p.m., so I had to double check that number. Every Saturday at 2 p.m., historic walking tours. It's all outside, it's socially distanced. It's a great way to get outside and enjoy some history. You can find all that information and more at crestedbuttemuseum.com. If you do want to keep up to date on all the programs that we've got going on and new stuff, we do have a newsletter, a monthly newsletter that goes out. So again, visit crestedbuttemuseum.com to sign up for that. If you'd like to support this program and the work that we do, you can make a donation at our website. You can also become a member. And then finally, you could also volunteer. We do love having volunteers help us take care of our history and run our events as well. A huge thank you to our lead sponsor, Ann Johnston with Western Colorado University Alumni Relations. Also to our other sponsors, Bud Bush of Bluebird Realty and Bill Petros, a board member of the museum. A big thank you to those guys. Before we get started, I do want to do a quick land acknowledgement, which we started doing during our History at Home series that just ended last week. The museum recognizes that we are guests here on this land, historically Ute territory. We acknowledge that the mining and ranching community that established itself at the end of the 1800s was at the expense of the Uncompahgre Ute and the Tabawatch Ute, who were forcibly removed from this area due to the Bruneau Treaty and the manipulation that followed. We hope that you will take time to visit our neighbor, the Ute Museum, located in Montrose, Colorado, with exhibits developed in partnership with the Ute Tribes by History Colorado, our state historic society. While we could never do this history justice, we do include information about Paleo Indians of the Gunnison Valley, the Ute people, the Bruneau Treaty, and the Los Pinos Indian Agency in our exhibits. The Crested Butte Mountain Heritage Museum knows that we have a great responsibility in representing many stories from our history, good and bad, and we continue to listen to those voices when they are ready to share. Finally, this program is being recorded, so if you want to share it with your friends or you know somebody that missed it, you can find it on our website, and we also have a YouTube channel, so it'll be on our YouTube channel and linked to our website. But give us a week to get that up. It takes us a little time to really get it up and out there. With that, I'll hand it off to you, Duane.
Thank you, Nell. And also when I start, I want to thank our sponsors very much. We really appreciate it. And a couple of comments before we get started tonight. Last year, on March the 14th, I was teaching a history of Crested Butte class at the Crested Butte Community School, and little did I know that that was my last session, because that's when the coronavirus began to hit and everything got shut down, and we had to go at Western on Zoom, but we didn't have that kind of technology at that time, or I didn't know what I was doing to continue the class. At that time, on March the 14th, I thought Zoom meant to go fast, but I had to learn. So I hope we have a lot of members of the class from last year who are able to tune in via Zoom this year. And I'll be on from 7 o'clock, starting at 7 o'clock, starting tonight for 12 sessions. And we're going to go all the way to April the 15th, and I'm going to cover such topics as, next week, we're going to talk about the geography, the Ute Indians, Spain, the fur trade, the placer miners, the explorers. But other topics we're going to take a look at include the railroads, skiing, coal mining, polka music with Pete Dunda, and I hope we can virtually do the polka, silver camps around Crested Butte, the ethnic people of Crested Butte. We're also going to take a look at ranching and water, and then a couple of satellite towns of Aspen and Leadville, which had a big impact on Crested Butte. I am going to raffle off a book that I wrote, a pictorial book on Crested Butte, And we're going to do that at the end of the session today. And anybody who is the first one to answer the trivia question is going to get a copy of the book. And Nell will get your address. I'll sign it and send it out to you. Tonight's topic is going to be the key to the understanding of Crested Butte and the Gunnison country. We're going to kind of set the stage for the history of Crested Butte and take a look at what has been the most important things in the history of Crested Butte and the Gunnison country. Now, I've asked Nell every couple of minutes or so to show a picture of the Crested Butte area, but it's not going to be in relation to what I'm talking about tonight completely. So there's a shot of Elk Avenue in 1882 looking west, and Chocolate Peak kind of in the background. Any of your out-of-town friends who may be from Crested Butte, we'd appreciate you contacting them and letting them know about what's going on. So here we go. When we talk about the history of Crested Butte and the Gunnison country, which began to open over 150 years ago, we are talking about an area at that time was known as a frontier. Now, frontier can mean many things. It can mean a boundary between countries. It can be a line separating wilderness from settlement, or it can be an unexplored and new field. It also can be a state of mind. And that's how I'd like to open my talk on the Gunnison country and Crested Butte tonight. And I'll tell you a little story. In the 1950s, the great Western historian David Lavender and one of the world's great anthropologists, Theodora Kreiber, who wrote The Last Surviving Indian in California, a great book called Ishi, were together where they had been many years before in the Lone Cone country right around Telluride in the San Miguel Valley. And Theodora Kreiber was reminiscing to David Lavender. And she said this about the San Miguel Valley, and we could say the same thing about the East River Valley that we'll be talking about tonight and in 11 other episodes. In that thin, dry air, life moved at a pace of almost terrible intensity. There were no neutral moments. The galloping brevity of spring and summer, the long months of winter with the threat of tragedy always hovering near. Colors were high, the reds in the soil, the fall gold of the aspens, the indescribable sky. Riding in summer and tobogganing in winter were fast and dangerous. The heights of the mountains and the depths of the canyons were beyond the human norm. One went about totally sensitized. No wonder recovery for the elders was a trip to the coast, and for a youngster, introversion. Get on your horse and ride until you look out and down, tremendously out and down. God was a pagan god in the air, over the mountains, in the waterfalls. But how can I give a feeling tone of my childhood in that high alpine valley, which simply is one of the most beautiful spots in the world? Theodora Kreiber and Lavender were living in one area. We're living in another area that's one of the most beautiful spots in the world. In 1888, a reporter for the Denver Post named Arthur Chapman wrote a three-paragraph litany that became famous, and it's called Out Where the West Begins. And I'm going to read it. Out where the hand clasp is a little stronger, out where the smile dwells a little longer, that's where the West begins. Out where the sun is a little brighter, where the snows that fall are a trifle whiter, where the bonds of home are a wee bit tighter, that's where the West begins. Out where the skies are a trifle bluer, out where friendship's a little truer, that's where the West begins. Out where a fresher breeze is blowing, where there's laughter in every streamlet flowing, where there's more of reaping and less of sowing, that's where the West begins. Out where the world is in the making, where fewer hearts with despair are aching, that's where the West begins. Where there's more of singing and less of sighing, where there's more of giving and less of buying, and a man makes friends without half trying, that's where the West begins. And that's Arthur Chapman, 1888, and he was right on. In Las Vegas, if you're on the crap table and you throw a couple of fours, that's called the hard way 8. And the odds of you doing that are 8 to 1. And when people moved into the Gunnison country in Crested Butte many years ago, those probably were the odds that were against you as you moved in. In 1881, a little girl was leaving her Kansas farm for Crested Butte. And before she left, she put her hands up in the air and she said, "Goodbye, God, I'm going to Colorado." And there probably was a little truth to that. Robert Service, writing in The Spell of the Yukon about Alaska, could have been writing about Crested Butte in the Gunnison country when he said, "I have clinched and closed with the naked North. I've learned to defy and defend. Shoulder to shoulder, we have fought it out. Yet the wild must win in the end." And then there was the great freighter David Wood of the Western Slope. In the Gunnison country in the early 1880s, he was accosted by a 23-year-old woman from New England who came up to him and said, "Sir, you've been in these parts very long?" And David Wood eyed her with contemptuous disdain and said, "Madam, I haul these damn mountains in here." And that is the name of the book about David Wood, written about by his two daughters. I haul these mountains in here. And then there was the famous comment of Mark Twain. "A mine," said Mark Twain, "is a hole in the ground owned by a liar." The Gunnison country frontier began to open thousands of years ago because we have found evidence of people who lived on top of W Mountain and Signal Peak near Gunnison and in other areas of the Gunnison country 10,000 years ago. Then, long after that, came the Ute Indians, the Native Americans, to be followed kind of in order by Spanish explorers, fur traders, John Gunnison and railroad men looking for a transcontinental railroad line, placer miners or gold panners, then surveyors, then ranchers, then silver miners, then coal miners, then skiers, and finally the recreational people that we have today. Looking backward, our area has experienced many changes and has gone through many periods of transition. But today, because of an increased national population, because of problems in the cities, because of more money, because of great beauty in our region, and because people able to work out of their homes, we are facing one of the greatest challenges ever, one that could change the character of our region immeasurably. Throughout its history, the Gunnison country and Crested Butte has always had what I call 8 keys, which have remained rather constant and which have molded the development and shaped the frontier of the Gunnison country and Crested Butte. And we're going to take a look at those tonight, a little general summary, and then we're going to get down to Crested Butte specifics next week. And we'll include Crested Butte a lot with this also. There's the railroad, of course, with the CF&I big mine behind it and Mount Emmons towering off in the distance, and that was taken in the 1890s. Number one key to understanding Crested Butte and the Gunnison country is geography. The western slope of Colorado that we live on has got 10% of the state's population, 33% of the land area, and 80% of the water. And therein lie many tales of woe, because the water is where the people ate, and the people ate where the water is. There are really 5 distinct sections of Colorado, and they're all separate and they all have their different interests. The western slope is 1. The San Luis Valley is 2. The eastern plains are 3. The Front Range is 4. And Denver is 5. All are different and all are probably a little suspicious of each other. A long time ago, a great English historian named Arnold Toynbee said, "Geography is the great lever of history. We are as we are today because of geography, because of the cold and the isolation and the snow and the elevation and the aridity." And Toynbee talked about England, a small island country that couldn't produce everything that it needed, so it had to have colonies and a great navy to protect them. And Greece, a great ancient civilization, but 25,000 square miles of one tangled mountain running into another. So they never could have one man in charge. They had to go to city states because of the difficulty of communication. And then Frederick Jackson Turner, in a great 12-page paper delivered before the American Historical Association in 1893 called The Significance of the Frontier in American History, in which Turner said, the one thing that separates Americans from anybody else in the world is the presence of free land in the West. The frontier has molded Americans. The second key to the understanding of Crested Butte and the Gunnison country is water. The lifeblood of our area, the lifeblood of Colorado, the lifeblood of the West. It is, they say, the most cussed and discussed topic in Colorado and the West. One early resident said, whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting. Former Governor John Love, water runs uphill towards money. There are two water doctrines in the United States. One is the water doctrine used east of the Mississippi River, and that's called riparian rights. And it basically says that anybody living along a river can take out water out of that river as it goes by his or her property, with two exceptions. You can't take so much out that you stop steamboats from operating, and you can't take so much out that you stop mill wheels from operating. And I would submit to you that if we're talking about mill wheels and steamboats, we're not talking about an arid area. We're talking about rivers like the Mississippi and the Ohio and the Tennessee, where water is no problem. You got plenty of it. That photo you're looking at is July 4th, 1918 in Crested Butte, Elk Avenue. The water doctrine for an arid area west of the Mississippi and in our neck of the woods is called the doctrine of prior appropriation. And it's got two rules. First in time, first in use. Whoever files the first water right is going to be the last person to go dry in a dry year. So the better water rights you have, the better off you are. And I can tell you this, in this year with the drought conditions we have, we may be seeing calls on water unless things change. And the second rule is use it or lose it. Nobody can hoard water in an arid region. If you can't prove you can use it, you got to give it up to somebody who can use it. The Gunnison country produces enormous amounts of water, and it's salt-free, and many people want it. And we'll have to continue to fight water grabs in the future, especially from Denver and the Front Range. Before, in water diversions to the eastern slope, their idea has always been, what's mine is mine and what's yours is negotiable. Water is our greatest asset, and it is the greatest long-term investment, and it'll continue to be worth a lot more than even it is today. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why. More people, finite amount of water. It's the ace in the hole for people in the Gunnison country. And anybody with water rights is going to make a better investment from those water rights in the future than they ever could on the New York Stock Exchange. The great fights in the future in our area and in the West in Colorado will be involved with water. Los Angeles has a local water supply of 8%. Lubbock, Texas, less. Phoenix, less. Tucson, less. Las Vegas, less. Front Range, about the same. Recreation, the environment, aesthetics, tourism are all important to our area today, and they're all good business. We got to take care of the water. There's not enough water to go around today and meet all demands. The Colorado River and its tributaries are way over appropriated. So in the future, we will probably see an eastern movement, people having to leave and go to the east where the water is. And the only thing that stops growth is economics. When water bills go to $25,000 a month, then a lot of people aren't going to be able to build. A lot of people would like to live in Aspen, but with a average house at about 2.5 million, they can't do it. The third key to the understanding of Crested Butte and the Gunnison country, railroads. Without the coming of railroads, Crested Butte and the Gunnison country would have remained an isolated wilderness. The arrival of the Denver and Rio Grande in 1881, the arrival of the Denver South Park and Pacific in 1882, gave ranchers and miners an outlet for their goods. Now they could ship their cattle out. Now they could get their ore out. And it brought in supplies and people. And I want to mention to everybody that everybody at that time was sustainable. You had to be before the railroad and even right after the railroad. And one of the big myths in the Gunnison country, and it's being eliminated by a lot of great people today, is that you can't farm and you can't raise agricultural produce. Later on, one of my topics is going to be sustainability, and I'll show you how we always were able to produce agricultural products. The railroads in the Gunnison country were narrow gauge. And as Gilbert Lathrop said in his great book, they were little engines run by big men, and they pioneered in railroad science. We had flangers, which scraped the snow off the tracks. Narrow gauges themselves were an innovation. Snow sheds on either side of the Alpine Tunnel and Marshall Pass. Helper engines, double header, triple header. 30-pound rails. These are all innovations that came from narrow gauge railroads in our area. And there are all kinds of little jokes told about the slowness of the narrow gauges. On time, anytime. You never wanted it to run over you because it was on you for so long. And then it was a great story of a wreck on a railroad in the Gunnison country, and a guy named Finnegan had to write up the wreck. And he wrote up about 3 pages and he gave it to his boss, and his boss said, I don't want to read Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. Shorten it the next time there's a wreck. 2 months later, another wreck. This time, Finnegan wrote it up with a 1-page report. Boss told him again, if next time there's a wreck, boil it down. So about 2 months later, another wreck, and this time Finnegan boiled down the wreck with the following. Off again, on again, gone again, Finnegan. That's about as short as you could make it. When the Denver South Park shut down in 1910 and the Denver Rio Grande pulled out their tracks in 1955, the Gunnison country and Crested Butte suffered economically and psychologically. There's a great photograph of one of the bars in Crested Butte with the Panion Boys and a whole bunch of guys. You can read their names off in the underneath. The fourth thing was a key to the understanding of Crested Butte and the Gunnison country is the federal government. The federal government owns 80% of all the land in the Gunnison country. In the past, the government has set the price of gold and silver high enough to where people could make money off of it, owned the land that pioneers squatted on, gave Indian protection, subsidized stage traffic, and built gigantic water projects. In the old days, the government was looked upon as a friend. And I always ask my class, let's go hip, hip, hooray for the federal government. And it's very muted. I don't get a whole lot of noise. And people look at me and say, what the hell's the matter with you? Are you crazy? But in the old days, the federal government was looked upon a friend. Now it's kind of an enemy. And the only difference between the government then and the government now was, or is, in the old days, there was a lot of land and very few people. Today, there's the same amount of land and many more people who want to use the land. Mountain bikers, skiers, ranchers who graze, rafters, fishermen, hunters, dirt bikes, paddle boards. We could go on and on. And the federal government can't be everything to everybody. The federal government's still very important in our area today. Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, Soil Conservation Service, United States Geological Survey, National Park Service, Bureau of Reclamation, and the Bureau of Mines. And I would submit to you that any entity owning 80% of an area can call a few shots. There is Frank and Gals, about where the post office is today, and you can see Frank sitting down back of the bar on the right, taken in the 1940s. Number 5 key to understanding the Gunnison country is mining. The Gunnison country has always been a great mining area. And the old adage, the more we change, the more we stay the same, has a great chance of coming true today. Now, miners, by their very nature, are very optimistic. And I'm going to tell you a story they told in the mining camps of the Gunnison country and throughout Colorado in the old days. Miner dies, everybody in the saloon was told, and went to heaven. And everybody in the saloon laughed. No miner they knew ever went to heaven because the guys had been engaging in gambling, drinking, and prostitution. But this guy had abstained from all of that. And he went to heaven and he presented a pass to St. Peter at the Golden Gate. And St. Peter said, "Can't take you, we're booked." And the miner said, "What the hell do you mean we're booked?" And St. Peter said, "Don't get on me." He said, "We had a big war out in the Middle East. A lot of good people died and they kind of filled it up." And the miner said, "I did not abstain from all the pleasures of life to be told I can't get in. I want a temporary pass. And if I go in and convince one person to come out, I'm in." St. Peter said, "That has not happened in 1,000,000 years. Nobody has ever left heaven." And the miner said, "Shut up and give me the pass." And St. Peter thought, and he said, "Well, nobody's going to leave heaven anyway, and I do feel bad about this guy," so he gave him a pass. 7 minutes later, 4,634 people streamed out of heaven, and they appeared to be in a fast hurry to leave. And St. Peter grabbed the miner. He said, "What the hell did you tell those people?" And the miner said, "What do you mean, what did I tell him?" He said, "I just told us big gold strike down in hell." And then the miner grabbed his knapsack and he headed away from heaven. And by this time, St. Peter was hot, grabbed the miner by the shoulder, said, "Where the hell do you think you're going?" And the miner said, "What do you mean, where do you think I'm going?" He says, "Haven't you heard? They got a big gold strike down in hell." Miners believed their own publicity. You didn't have to have any assuredness of gold or silver. All you had to have was a rumor. 25 to 40,000 people flocked into the Gunnison country to mine gold and silver in the early 1880s. They lived in every gulch. They were transient. They didn't stay during the winter, and they were all on all kinds of hopes for gold and silver. Some of the great camps that sprang up were the following: Pitkin on Quartz Creek, Gothic, Copper Creek in the East River, White Pine in the Upper Temich, Irwin, Coal Creek, and Tin Cup right near Taylor Park. They were the big towns with great optimism. Gunnison and Crested Butte were the supply towns. But there were other towns around Crested Butte with great hopes that never made it. Hidalgo, Schofield, Crystal, Pittsburgh, O.B. Joyful. That is the way the dirt road looked into Crested Butte as late as the 1950s, when the railroad up until that time was the major way you got in. And around Jack's cabin, they had a low area, and in the spring of the year, it was muddy and cars couldn't get through. The mining boom ended with the silver panic of 1893, but mining remained. Coal mining continued on. Marble, the #1 marble town in the world, located in the Gunnison country, still operating. Granite, the Aberdeen Granite Quarry, turned out granite for the Colorado State Capitol. Zinc and lead, Callahan Lead and Zinc Company at White Pine. Uranium south of Gunnison. They had a Gunnison uranium mill out near W Mountain and where the Public Works building is today. Molybdenum, one of the richest deposits in the world, is located right above Crested Butte on Mount Emmons, Red Lady Basin. All those minerals and substances are there, and some might be used in the future. The Gunnison country is one of the most versatile mining areas in the nation and in the world. 6 major key: cattle industry. The cattle industry goes back to the 1870s, and Sylvester Richardson and Alonzo Hartman, and the realization then that 70-day growing seasons probably wouldn't allow farming. So they turned to ranching. And when the silver camps opened up, ranchers made a lot of money and they were able to expand their herds. And it was very hard work in those early days, clearing sage, clearing willows, digging irrigation ditches, and that led to the great hayfields of today. If you look at photos back in the 1870s, it was sagebrush and willows and not a whole lot of grass. The elimination of the Ute Indians, the arrival of the railroads, meant that cattle could get to markets cheaper than ever before. And new markets were created outside of our local area. A Montrose rancher named William Boot in 1882 was the first guy to ship cows by rail out of the Gunnison country to the Denver stockyards. The Gunnison country became famous for having some of the highest quality cattle, best bred cattle in the world. And that was the story of Dan Thornton, who owned a big ranch right where North Elk Meadows is today. Sold a couple of bulls in his dispersal sale to an Argentinian investor for $50,000 each in 1949. The Ford Motor Company came to Gus Roberson's ranch up Ohio Creek in 1950 and made a documentary called The American Cowboy. And we have that in our library today. One of the big fights that came in the cattle industry was cattle versus sheep after the turn of the century. 2 men were kicked out of the Stock Growers Association because they each owned 4 domestic sheep. And an angry debate came, with Alonzo Hartman saying, 4 can grow to 400. And when they asked Hartman, have you ever eaten mutton? And Alonzo Hartman said, yes, he said, but I'm damned ashamed of it. Now there's part of the Keystone Mine, folks, in the early 1950s. Treatment plant right in that area west of town. The cattle industry is the oldest continuous one in the Gunnison country. Ranching is absolutely vital to our future today because the ranchers control the land and the water, and they are absolutely vital in controlling development. And they are among the best environmentalists we have. Number 7 key to the understanding of the Gunnison country is tourism. There's Gal Storica in back of Frank and Gal's in the 1950s. Tourism is the second largest industry in the state and the second largest industry in the Gunnison country. It is worth $15 billion in the state. And a lot of people don't consider it an industry, but it is. Skiing, hunting, fishing, mountain biking, 4-wheel drives. The Blue Mesa Reservoir is the second largest tourist area in the state, behind Rocky Mountain National Park. About 1.5 million tourists come there every year. Black Canyon National Park, 200,000 people a year. 350,000 skier days at Crested Butte. Mountain biking. All bring people in. Tourism has always been important. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad had the following phrase on its engine: scenic line of the West. Palmer Hoyt, the editor of the Denver Post, had a standing order that when the willow flies hatched on the Gunnison around Iola, the telegrapher there had to wire him, and Palmer Hoyt was on the next train out. One important factor with regard to tourism is that we've got to maintain our air and our water quality and control growth. A great environment is great business. And if we want to keep people coming, we're going to take care of it. There's one of the guys, a lot of those early immigrant people played in bands. They all were very musical. And there's one of them in the 1920s near the main drag in Crested Butte. And the eighth major key to the understanding of the Gunnison country is electricity. Crested Butte had it very early because of the CF&I big mine. Gunnison had it fairly early because of the Gunnison Gas and Water Works. However, everybody in between didn't get it until the late 1930s or early 1940s. And it wasn't until Franklin Roosevelt's Rural Electric Association started that we began to get it. The Gunnison County Electric Association began in 1938. And the reason that nobody got electricity in between those two towns was there weren't that many people and the electric company couldn't make a lot of money off of them. In the western part of Colorado near Telluride, this is a later story, a guy named Louis Nunn got alternating current to his Gold King mine because of a guy named Nikola Tesla. Direct current doesn't run very far. Alternating current does. There is Frank Storica from Frank and Gels in the 1940s. One more thing, and I didn't put this down as a key, but the Gunnison country is very lucky because we got timber, we got mineral wealth, we got water, we got space, we got the mountains. There is a shot of Elk Avenue in Crested Butte in the 1940s. Looks a little different than today. Now, I've given you all the keys to understand Crested Butte and the Gunnison country, but I want to finish off with one thing that associates with the keys. A long time ago, when the Muslim civilization of Baghdad was the #1 civilization in the world, a guy called a master who owned a lot of land outside of Baghdad sent his servant into town, as he had done many times before, into Baghdad to stock up on groceries for the next month. And the servant came back early and no groceries. And the master said, "How come you're back early and how come there are no groceries?" And the frightened serf said, "I've been accosted by death in the marketplace. I got to get out of here. I'm going to go to Samura." Samura is a town about 20 miles away. And the master said, "Now you go ahead and go to Samura, but by God, I'm going down to Baghdad, find out what went on." And he went into Baghdad and he ran into death in the marketplace. And he said, "Why did you jostle and threaten my servant in the marketplace?" And Death's reply was, "I did not jostle or threaten your servant in the marketplace. I merely expressed great surprise that he would be here in Baghdad today when I got an appointment with him in Samura tomorrow." Now, if you go online, you can get appointment in Samura. And that was told by Dr. David Menninger of the Menninger Psychological Institute in Topeka, Kansas, at a big meeting of all the psychologists, and he got a standing ovation. Appointment in Samura. Que sera, sera, what Doris Day used to sing. Whatever will be, will be. There's no rhyme or reason why things happen. So all those 8 keys I gave you, 50 years from now, we may look back and say, well, Vandenbusche couldn't have known about this, or maybe he was a little wrong on this. Que sera, sera. And I will finish with a great poem that I think tells a lot about what we feel about Crested Butte, especially, and the Gunnison country, and is a poem written by a man named Eugene Field, one of the great writers of the Denver Post and later on New York. And it's called Casey's Table D'Ote. Eugene Field used to drink beer and party it up with people who lived at Gold Hill above Boulder during the great days of the mining boom. And then he was transferred out to New York. And 25 years later, he came back and he went up to Gold Hill and everybody was gone. The boom had busted. And Eugene Field lamented the following in Casey's Table D'Ote. Oh, them days on Red Hoss Mountain when the skies was fair and blue, when the money flowed like liquor and the folks was brave and true, when the nights was crisp and balmy and the camp was all astir, with the joints all throwed wide open and no sheriff to demur. Oh, them days on Red Hoss Mountain, in the Rockies far away. There's no such place nor times like them as I can find today. What? Though the camp is busted, I seem to see it still, lying like I love it on the big and warty hill. And I feel a sort of yearning and a choking in my throat when I think of Red Hoss Mountain and of Casey's Table D'Ote. And I think we all feel the same way about Crested Butte and the Gunnison country. That is it. I'm now going to give the trivia question. Nell's going to tell you how to answer. First one to answer is going to get it. So Nell, tell them how to answer.
All right, guys. So post in the chat. First one to post in the chat wins. Just to note that due to like internet speeds and if they're posting to everyone or just panelists, it may look like you have won, but on our side, somebody else may have won. So just so everybody is aware, we will email the winner after the show. Take it away.
Here is the question. Drum roll, please. Name 4 coal mines outside of the big mine on the bench that existed in Crested Butte. Can't call the big mine the mine. 4 other mines that existed in Crested Butte during the history of that area. And we will await the answers.
All right, post in the chat if you think you know.
Rachel Gard says no idea, but I enjoyed the class. Thank you, Rachel.
Ashley Upchurch with Keystone, Jokerville, Painter Boy, and Twister.
That is wrong.
Lynn.
Sean Loki, that is wrong. Now remember, around coal mines around Crested Butte, except the big mine.
Lynn has Jokerville.
Well, let's see what we got here. Hold on, go back to Frank again.
Lynn has Jokerville, Floresta, Anthracite, Carbon.
Say that again.
Jokerville, Floresta, Anthracite, Carbon.
That's good enough for me.
All
Very
right.
good. Who got that?
Lynn Froetster. Sorry if I totally.
Hey, well, we'll get everything. We'll get her address. Now, anybody who has any questions, I will attempt to answer, or if you want to get on the chat board, go ahead, but I'm available for any questions and I'll try to answer.
We did get some questions during the lecture. Scrolling to it. Don Mills asked, do we know who owns the most water rights in Gunnison or CB?
You know, the most water rights, I'm just going to guess. The most as opposed to the best. Gunnison probably and Crested Butte are right in there, but the big water rights, the early water rights are owned by the ranchers, the early ranching families. But in terms of who owns the most, I don't know.
All right. Phyllis and Richard Guerreri noted, Wall Street has begun trading water as a commodity like gold or oil. The country's first water market launched on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange in December with 1.1 billion in contracts tied to water prices in California. Wow.
Very good, Rich. Very good, Phyllis. Yeah, that's right. And it's going to be worth a lot of money soon.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I had somebody ask about our email list. You can sign up for our email list at crestedbuttemuseum.com. You can find all that kind of stuff there. Let's see, lots of good guesses.
Anybody wants to get on the chat board too, let me know who you are. Be love to see you. Don, good to see you. Tell your wife hi for me. Tell Sharon hi for me. Donnie, good to have you aboard from Missoula.
Robert asks, how much of the land is available for cattle now?
How much land is available for cattle?
Yeah.
Well, in terms of acreage, I'd have to ask the CSU, but you know, you got to have permits, a lot, but I don't know just how many. I can get that for you next week, but I don't know right now. Carmen Fernandez, Kansas, nice to have you aboard. Any other questions? Tempe, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for joining. Just a reminder that, oh, we got one question from Ashley Upchurch in the Q&A. Is there somewhere we can see these photos again after the presentation? So we do have the recording available, but these are all Duane's photos. Lisa Ye had donated them to the museum, some of those photos, so the Frank and Gal's photos to the museum, and I think she shared them with you as well, Duane?
Yeah.
Great.
And I will have photos every week dealing with the topic. So they'll all be available. And if anybody's interested in a particular photograph, I am the custodian of the old timers who gave me permission to photocopy them or scan them. So I'm not one to hang on to and not let anybody have them. So you just let me know. Kay, thank you very much. John, thank you very much. Oh, the Hoax from Oklahoma City.
We've got another question.
Thank you, John.
From Mark.
I do remember the Hoax.
What impact did the college have in the area, or does the college have?
What impact did the college have?
Yeah.
Very extensive. It's worth about 60 million a year right now to the economy. But you can go to the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab and Dr. John C. Johnson, a faculty member who started it. So, you know, and the ski team made Western known all over the United States and even the world with all the Olympians we turned out. So extensive coverage from the college and now the university.
Right. Well,
Thanks, Vicki.
Thanks everybody for joining. If there's any last questions, throw them in there. In the meantime, while you're thinking of your questions, just remember that you can find this recording at crestedbuttemuseum.com. You can also become a member or make a donation or shop in our store or be a volunteer in order to support all the work that we do. Also, a huge thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to our lead sponsor, Ann Johnston with Western Colorado University Alumni Relations. Thank you also to Bud Bush with Bluebird Realty and Bill Petros, board member of the museum. Also, we've got walking tours every Saturday at 2 p.m. So a very safe way to get out and learn some history and walk around town.
Any last chats? Appreciate all of you being on. Thank you, Hillary. And Vandenbusche is over and out, and I will see everybody at 7 o'clock next Thursday. Oh, we got one more.
One more from Gail. What was the first point in understanding Gunnison country?
The first point was geography.
There you go.
Elevation, water, lack of water, isolation, cold weather. There are reasons, I always tell my class, why only 17,000 people live in the Gunnison country. When my mother was alive, I couldn't get her here from Canyon City. Even though the weather forecast was perfectly clear for a week, she wasn't coming over Monarch Pass. And a lot of people don't like the snow and the cold. They don't like the stuff that we love. So we're happy there are not too many here. Yeah, thank all of you for the kind comments, and we will see you next Thursday. Vandenbusche over and out.